Welcome to the Real News Network. I'm coming to you from Washington, D.C., and joining us from Sao Paulo, Brazil is Pepe Escobar. Thanks for joining us, Pepe.
Thanks, Paul. Thanks for having me.
Pepe Escobar writes for Asia Times Online, is a regular contributor to the Real News Network, has been in Iran often, has covered Iran for many years, and as you can tell by the fact that he hasn't shaved, he's been up all night monitoring the events in Iran as they have unfolded in the last few hours. So, Pepe, bring us up to date.
Well, let's get to the chase. What happened in Iran was basically a military coup. It's not by accident that some bloggers, Iranian bloggers, are twittering that, this looks like Chile, Pinochet, 1973. The difference is the coup was applied by the Republican Guards with the connivance of the supreme leader. So what we have here is a war at the top between two very strong factions in an extremely complicated and fluid Iranian political system. On the side of Ahmadinejad, we have most of all the Republican Guards who are now poised to, I would say, control most of the country. So we can say this is more or less a takeover of Iran by the Republican Guards. Now they are state power. Allied with them, they have the Basiji militias. These are the volunteer militias that sprang up after the Iranian Revolution in '79. They are volunteer, they are not regulated, and they respond directly to the supreme leader. In Iran, people tell you that they are called the army of 20 million. They are supposed to be 20 million. That's not true. They are several million, let's say 4 or 5 million. But a few months ago, a plan was structured in Iran to bring them to the level of 13 million people. So every Basiji had to recruit at least 4 or 5 Basijis. So how do they do this recruiting? In the rural provinces, this is very easy. Unemployment in Iran, not official unemployment, real unemployment, is from 20 to 30%, at least for young people. So if you're a Basiji, there's the ethos of being part of, let's say, a glorified gang. You are covered by the official state powers. You are enforcing the principles of the Islamic Revolution. So they are considered, as people say it in Iran, principalists or hardcore Khomeinists. All these people, by the way, are Khomeinists. We are always under the framework established by Khomeini in '79. So the Basijis, the Republican Guards, Ahmadinejad forces, the police establishment as a whole, and the Ministry of Interior, that's very important, which is controlled by the Ahmadinejad faction. On the other side of the divide, very few people in Iran, I would say 2 months ago, or even a month ago, were expecting the Green Revolution conducted by Mossad. When the debates started, television debates started, that was the catalyst. Because the first big debate was Ahmadinejad against Mousavi. And Ahmadinejad was, a lot of people in Iran, in the blogosphere, are saying he looked deranged. And it's very easy for us to see it. We can watch on YouTube the whole debate in Farsi. Even without the English subtitles or with an English translation, he looks crazy. And cool, calm, possessed, very poised. Mousavi, he was saying, look, he's lying about the unemployment and inflation figures. He did not accuse Ahmadinejad of being a dictator. He's saying that, look, the policies implemented by Ahmadinejad and his factions are leading towards a dictatorship.
Break down the other side. You gave us a sense of the Revolutionary Guard and the political alignment around them. Now talk about Rafsanjani and Mousavi and the alignment of forces around them.
When Ahmadinejad and the Ministry of Interior, because they monitor what happens in Iran 24/7, when they saw this groundswell in the streets, especially in the big cities, not only Tehran, I'm talking about Tehran, Isfahan, Tabriz, Mashhad, Shiraz, all the big cities in Tehran, there was, okay, this guy, he was a former prime minister during Khomeini. Everybody knows that Mousavi was outside of the equation for more or less 20 years, but they remember that he was a very competent manager during the 80s, during the Iran-Iraq war. He kept the Iranian economy more or less balanced in the most difficult, in the beginning of the revolution and at war with Iraq. And they also remember that when he was prime minister, he was a kind of balancing act between Khomeini and Khamenei, who was president at the time. So Khomeini was more or less using Mousavi to control Khamenei as president. And Mousavi, because he was in the middle of the whole thing, he could play Khomeini against Khamenei and implement more or less sound economic policy, which is in the Islamic Republic terms, you can imagine what it was during the 80s. You know, they were under sanctions, they were at war, and the country did not collapse. So when Ahmadinejad saw the groundswell, the Green Revolution, and the Minister of Interior, his tactics changed because he started to accuse Rafsanjani directly during the debates. And this is very, very important for popular sentiment in Iran, because Rafsanjani is a billionaire. He's the richest man in Iran. He's probably the most powerful man in Iran apart from the supreme leader. He controls the Council of Guards and the Council of Experts. He is the guy who could, in fact, choose the next supreme leader if he has enough votes with the Council of Experts.
Or become that leader himself.
Or become, probably not himself, but have his man to be the supreme leader. It's much better. Rafsanjani is the typical Machiavellian player. He prefers to be in the background. And in fact, when he was president, he was not as good at when he's, scheming in the background, like a Cardinal Richelieu, So, and these attacks by Ahmadinejad against Rafsanjani, they work very well on a popular level. That's why in one of the stories I did for the Rio News, the last one, in fact, I was saying that one of the reasons that Ahmadinejad won is, yes, he has a lot of support in the working classes, with the peasants, in the rural countryside, but one of his main themes is corruption. And people on a popular level, if you go to a mosque, a bazaar, or a tea shop in a provincial town in Iran, they talk about Hashemi, as they call Rafsanjani, as a corrupt billionaire in Tehran, who doesn't understand our problems here in the countryside. So this worked very well. By reading the blogosphere and our sources in Iran, this was not enough for Ahmadinejad to win the election by almost 2-1 margin. And that's where the whole operation at the Ministry of Interior comes in. How did they steal the election? And I think more or less we can establish a more or less pretty faithful timeline of what happened between 10 p.m. in Tehran on Friday night and 2 a.m. In 4 hours, they consolidated the victory, which is absolutely impossible. These votes are hand votes. They were counted by hand. You cannot count 46 million votes in 4 hours. It's absolutely impossible. And the legal provision for the elections in Iran, you have 3 days to do the counting. You have to certify them. You have to send them to the supreme leader. The supreme leader approves it, and then you announce it live to the whole country and to the world. They announced that 4 hours later, as we all know. By 2 a.m., Ahmadinejad was a victor with 62% of the votes, which, by the way, never changed when they were counting the other provinces, including the province of Mousavi. He's from Azerbaijan. He's Azeri, and he lost 4-1 in his own province, which is absolutely impossible. And every Iranian knows that, and they're saying that in the blogosphere. So, and by 3 a.m., we had Basiges in motorcycles and convoys of 30, 40 jeeps and armored cars in the middle of Tehran, followed by the Basiges on motorbike with the Iranian flag saying that Ahmadinejad had won. And then the Green Revolution started to see what was, they finally identified what was happening. And then they were trying, yesterday, Saturday, they were trying to piece together how the election was stolen. So more or less, everybody knows what happened during these 4 hours. And the interview with the director, Mohsen Makhmalbaf, that it's on the Rio News website, it's very important. Because around 11:30 midnight, Tehran time, he got that famous phone call from the Minister of Interior.
He, being Mousavi's headquarters, got the phone call.
Exactly. And he became a sort of, now he's the official spokesman of...
Makhmalbaf, yeah. He's in Paris now because he's able to speak. Yeah.
Exactly. And what he says in his interview is absolutely crucial. The Minister of Interior called and said, look, you won, but you cannot say that to the rest of the country because we are afraid of displeasing the huge Ahmadinejad masses. So hold on while we Still the election, maybe. And that's what happened by 2 a.m. So they had 4 hours to do the whole thing. What we don't know, what nobody knows, and Iranian bloggers, Iranian analysts, how did they do that? Was it long-term planning? Was it very short-term planning? Or was it last-minute planning? That's what nobody knows.
So what you seem to have is you have one section of the elite, Ahmadinejad, the supreme leader, the Revolutionary Guard, whose social base is to rally people in the countryside, to some extent the urban poor behind them. And they do that often by just handing out money. I know Ahmadinejad has this thing which is Write the President, and millions of people, I think they say they've had, as many as 7 million letters come in, and they have an army of people that open these letters from people from the countryside, and they send them little bits of money directly from the president's office, which of course builds up a great allegiance to Ahmadinejad. Then you have the other section of the elite around, of course, Mousavi and Rafsanjani, and they're mobilizing the urban youth with promises of liberalization on the cultural front. But is it not really two clash of big economic interests here? There's a lot of money at stake, not oil money, but all the industrial wealth of Iran as well. And these two sections, including the Revolutionary Guard, who, if I understand it correctly, are very involved in businesses. They're not just like an armed force that we're used to in our countries. Talk a little bit about this clash of economic forces.
Absolutely. In fact, our military coup, if we go along these lines, means that the Republican Guards are going to run the economy, basically. They are already a very powerful force. They have airline companies, airports, factories, industries. Parts of the bazaar belong to the Republican Guards as well. So now they are taking over the economy as a whole. So it's crazy because I remember that the United States declared the Revolutionary Guards a terrorist entity. So now they got that on a plate, a terrorist entity controlling a great Middle Eastern power. So this is how it's going to be read, of course, by some sectors in Washington, by Israel, of course. But the economic thing in Iran is extremely complicated because it's a mix of state and private. It's a semi-socialist economy, let's put it this way, or semi-Brezhnev Russia style economy.
Or state capitalist.
Private initiative is very, it's key. Like it's still a bazaar economy, basically. And the bazaarists, they used to be aligned with Ahmadinejad in 2005. Not anymore because of high inflation, high unemployment, this, of course, the effects of the sanctions and the utmost incompetence of Ahmadinejad's economic managers. The bazaarists are suffering as well. So, a lot of foreign journalists who were talking to people at the Tehran bazaar, which is the most important these past few days, they have been saying exactly that. The bazaarists, they switched their vote. Okay, look, we need a well-managed economy. We're not even thinking about more cultural liberties. We want to make money again. And with this economic incompetence, it's absolutely impossible. On the countryside is different because the Ahmadinejad policies, you can, some people are comparing them to Chavez handouts even as well. It's different. Some of these handouts, in fact, are very sound policies. One example, there are 3 million women in Iran making carpets. They were not insured, didn't have social security, didn't have any protections. Ahmadinejad installed protection for women weavers all over the country. It's a huge industry. They export a lot of carpets all over the world. It's a source of foreign income. So let's protect these workers. So some of the initiatives are sound, but the overall way they manage the economy is crazy. Because when oil was $140, $150 a barrel last year, they were getting this, $70 billion a year in oil money, for instance, and they depleted in handouts and pork, basically. He built some...
Pork's an unfortunate term in Iran.
Yes, I know.
But just in case anybody doesn't know it, this American term of handing out money to buy votes, more or less.
Forgive me the analogy, of course. But, okay, handouts. But some of these handouts were to infrastructure stuff, like building roads in Sistan, Baluchistan, for instance. They need it because it's a desert. It borders Pakistani Baluchistan. It's a sensitive area. But some was to, okay, let's give some money to this guy over there because he can get us, 50,000 Basijis in 3 months. So it was, buying political influence in the remote parts of the country. It's a very populist regime, but basically it's economic incompetence. So people, the upper middle class segment of the revolution, the globalized, the women vote, the students, of course, they know that Ahmadinejad is not the bogeyman that, let's say, Bibi Netanyahu would paint. But they know everything about his incompetence because they feel it in real life. And on top of economic incompetence, it was the total absence of civil liberties. Like, in the election of 2005, I remember I was in Tehran at that time. And the overall feeling after Ahmadinejad was elected was there's going to be a major cultural crackdown. And that's exactly what happened. Crackdown over women, more Basijis persecuting women everywhere, closing down reformist newspapers, very vigilant over the internet, YouTube, internet providers and all that.
Pepe, let's do another segment of the interview, and in the next segment, let's talk about where this open civil war in the elite might lead, and what U.S. policy, how it affects it, and what it might be in the future. So please,
that's the key question.
So please join us for the next segment of our interview, Pepe Escobar on the events in Iran.